Now, if you've been following my channel for any amount of time, you know that I am a gigantic, super huge fan of the Supergirl TV show. And I have been on the forefront, battling, wondering why there isn't, I don't know, frankly, more inclusion in the show, frankly, more diversity. And I want to look at this story and from this particular angle. I am mostly interested in how culture warriors or the culture battle takes precedence over storyline. And ultimately, that is why, in my opinion, many of these diversity reboots and things like that are doomed to fail. The Buffy the Vampire reboot, okay, fine. But if the only thing you want to go in and change is the physical attributes of the cast, and you don't provide a compelling story, the movie, the TV show, the record, they're all doomed to fail. We saw this with the Ghostbusters reboot. We saw this with the Ocean's 11 reboot. These are movies that are doomed to fail because their existence, their very nexus, was simply to redo something that had already been done, but change the physical characteristics of the cast. There's nothing more low effort. There's nothing more low IQ than expecting the fandom to be reinvigorated by retelling the exact same story with very little changes, changing only the physical characteristic of a cast member. And I have long been on the fence about this being a motivating factor for Hollywood. I know that it has always been there, but when you see them, when you see people come right out and admit that, for example, Joss Whedon saying that he's rebooting Buffy simply for diversity, you wonder if it's worth questioning it anymore. I know many of you in the comment section will say things like, well, no shit, this has been going on forever. You use terminology like, well, they want to normalize transgender, they want to normalize gayness. I think the correct answer is probably like, that is a motivating factor for some people. But the only thing that should matter is that whether or not the show is entertaining. And we have now the Supergirl finally adding a transgender superhero. Yes, her superhero is fooling men into thinking she's a woman. Ha! Transgender activist will play character Nyanal for CW's show's 4th season. Yes, when nobody's talking about your show, this is the kind of changes you make. This is the kind of advertising spin you need. But the interesting thing is, and again, I have zero problems with people who are transgender. I only have problems with bad business decisions. If your hope is to pander to trans people, you're pandering to a few thousand people in this country. That's not going to save your ratings. The CW Supergirl will be introducing the first ever transgender superhero. In upcoming 4th season, the show announced during its San Diego Comic-Con panel. Maybe this is why major companies like Netflix and HBO and Marvel didn't have big presences at Comic-Con, because Comic-Con is becoming about social justice and not comics. Transgender actress Nicole Maines will play the character Nyanal, likely a version of the DC comic character Neuronal, a humanoid alien also known as Dream Girl who can see into the future. And here we go. It feels fitting to say, with great power comes great responsibility. Ugh. Maines told Variety, I'm nervous, but I want to do it right. Maines was featured in the HBO documentary The Trans List and has long been an activist for transgender rights. Yes, We have finally reached it. Just like we saw with the Rub and Tug movie, which all signs now point to just not getting made because the only reason anyone had to see that movie was Scarlett Johansson starring in it. Now we have, well, we're just going to create trans roles, or we're going to take a character that wasn't from lore trans, make them trans, and make sure we cast a trans person for it. Because that is the level of absolute social justice we're at right now. Supergirl starts back up on October 14th, but the big question is, will Nia Nal have the power to recognize Supergirl with the title character as a title character with her glasses on? That's it. That's the whole story. Watch this show, they hired a trans person. That's what they're paying for, right? Supergirl welcomes an ad. Transgender superhero played by trans activist Nicole Maines. Now, are they going to write the character as a trans person? I would appear so based on the language. Transgender actress turned activist Nicole Maines from Royal Pains is joining Supergirl as TV's first transgender superhero in season 4. Producers announced during the show's San Diego Comic-Con. Supergirl had a big announcement at Geek Culture Extravaganza. It's no longer about geeks, by the way, just so you know. The CW show is welcoming their first transgender superhero. Transgender activist and actor Nicole Maines will be playing Nia Nal, also known as Dreamer, who is described as a young transgender woman with fierce drive to protect others. So they have written in the character as trans. Pretty sure this alien character that they co-opted was not trans. Interesting take. The news that DC Comics Show will welcome transgender character played by a transgender person, because that's the only people that can play transgender people in peak 2018, is a step towards inclusion at a time when Scarlett Johansson has faced backlash for signing on to play a transgender man. The overwhelming consensus from critics of Johansson's casting, the transgender character should be played by transgender actors. Well, they're fucking wrong. In fact, they're dumb. They're sexist and they're racist. I don't know. What's the correct word for that? Homophobic? In case they didn't know, Scarlett Johansson really isn't friends with the Hulk, and she's not actually Black Widow. So why is the line in the sand the fact that somebody's trans? Certainly, it's well modernly accepted that gay characters can be played by straight people and straight people can play gay characters. Why is it that trans people have to have this special treatment? And if you get the answer to that, let me know. Television's first transgender superhero will arrive on Supergirl. New York Times. This is peak New York Times. Gee, I wonder why your circulation is tanking. The first transgender superhero on television will soon arrive. Nicole Maines has been cast. The casting announced at the show's panel at Comic-Con. I've been doing a lot of auditions lately because a lot of different shows have been really eager to tell the story of transgender people. Give me a list. Give me a list. Miss Maines said on stage, it only seems fitting that we have a trans superhero for trans kids to look up to. I wish there was a trans superhero when I was little. I doubt it. A lot of 7-year-olds feeling the pains of confusing sexuality. Welcome to the club. Most kids, when they're 12 or 13, aren't exactly sure what's going on in their pants. It doesn't mean they're transgender, and it doesn't mean that we need to have a transgender superhero. Most trans people would tell you that it's not exactly a blessing. But that would make sense because, of course, she is a transgender activist. In a landmark case, sued her school district after being denied access to the girls' restroom. That's right. That's right, folks. She profited off it and forced her way into the women's locker room, of course, being a man. biologically. I'm sure that she is going to bring huge audience. Our show is all about inclusion and representation. Well, I didn't know that. I thought it was about superheroes. Jessica Queller, an executive producer, said in an internet interview at Comic-Con with Clever News, with a clever spelling, because somebody already owned clever.com and they didn't want to spend $1,000 for it, so they just put a WV in there. A double V. It seems the perfect moment in our culture to introduce a trans female superhero. Well, yeah, right? The number of transgender characters in comics world is limited, but growing. In the comic Batgirl, the title character's best friend, Alyssa Yeo, is a transgender woman, and Chalice, a transgender superhero, made her debut in Alters in 2016. Yes, a percentage of the population that represents far less than 1% needs more representation in comics and television. Now, I'm all for inclusion. I'm all for trans people being happy. But I'm not a fan of this narrative that only trans people can be played by trans people. And I'm really nervous about this narrative about, like, well, we need to show strong, powerful trans people to our kids. We need to give them this message at a time in their life in which they are confused already. If it is worshipped in a way in the show, it may have people choose a path that has insanely high suicide rates. It may force people to not answer the tough questions about their young sexuality, but instead decide that, well, they'll just be both. I'm not sure, but surely the ratings will soar. Supergirl, 2018.